So welcome back to Stu Structures. I am slowly going through a lot of my stuff from storage, and I found two notebooks of B&O Railroad paper goods. So I'm going to show you some more Railroadiana, so stay tuned. So I am Mark Stewart, and this is Stu Structures. You know, I've been through a lot of my other Railroadiana and paper goods and various things that I've collected in this hobby, you know, and it all helps you with your model railroading. Some of the paper goods are good for using as examples for things you can do in paperwork for your model railroading if you want to. And there's a lot of things which really do no good for model railroading, but I enjoy collecting these anyway. I'm a B&O railroad enthusiast, and you know, I have found two more notebooks of my paper goods from the B&O Railroad. So I'm going to go through these with you and just show you the kinds of things I've collected. So stay tuned. I've been looking for these two notebooks for a while, and you can see they're a little overstuffed with just tons of paper goods from the B&O Railroad. It just, you know, there's way more stuff here than I really need. I probably ought to just sell some of this and get rid of it, but you know, I've enjoyed collecting this over the years, and some things do pertain to model railroading. Now I have just tons and tons of different schedules from all over the system, from different periods of time, from the late 1800s through the 1950s, and some stuff even into the Chessie era. You know, and these timetables, they're great if you're wanting to model passenger trains on your model layout. And you know, the period that I model had tons of B&O passenger trains. At the time I modeled, there was actually 28 passenger trains a day that went through Grafton, West Virginia, which I model. And a lot of those trains had cars that, you know, switched between the different passenger trains heading in different directions. But, you know, there's just tons of these schedules out there, and, you know, they're just invaluable. A lot of collectors just like to collect them, but you can look down through time and really understand how all the different trains changed over time, and their schedules changed, the consist of the trains changed, and all that information isn't always in the schedule. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't, but you know, it's just, I've just came across a whole lot of these over time, and it just, you know, I've really enjoyed going through these. Now, especially if you're modeling a specific area on the railroad, you know, there's schedules made for system-wide. The B&O just had such a huge system that even if you wanted to model a small leg of the railroad, you know, there were schedules just for that leg of the railroad that you can look up and see what the passenger trains were just on that railroad. A couple pictures ago, you saw a little pocket calendar style of one of these too. There's just a lot of different varieties out there, different sizes, shapes, colors, and you know, just about anything you can think of in the way of schedules. And you know, just a lot of great information. The other type of schedule is an employee schedule, and you know, these had a lot more information of them, and I have two examples of these here, but there's just tons of information that was available to the employee that you didn't find in normal schedules. Now, another thing I've collected a lot of over a period of time are passes. And basically, if anybody worked for the railroad, they or their family were allowed to get a pass which authorized them to ride on the railroad in the passenger cars, or, you know, if you were a railroad employee, sometimes you could get a hop on a caboose from one town to another, or, you know, back home for the evening or something like that. And I've just been able to come across just tons of passes over a long period of time. Some of these are for, wives that use the railroad when their husbands were at work, or, a lot of people back in the day, went from home to town to get groceries and back home by the railroad. And if you worked for the railroad, just gave you a free way to get to town to do your shopping and back. Now, another thing out there that I've just been lucky enough to come across a whole lot of are stock certificates to railroads. And, I really like these. These are something that, I might get rid of a few. I just have more than I need, but I would love to just frame some of these and put them on the wall in my hobby room eventually. Several of these are just really works of art. All the penmanship and the ink drawings and all the types of things that went into just putting one of these together, they really are a work of art. And these also changed a lot down through time, and just what was on the cover and the borders, and some of these more modern ones here that really are not as ornate other than the border. But they gave a lot of good information. Sometimes you can find famous people that own the stocks and their names are on there as well, or something like that. But just really a very unique piece of history, every one of these, and each one tells its own little story, and to me, they're well worth having. I don't necessarily need as many as I have, but I really enjoy them. Now, another thing are, different types of baggage tickets to get on and off trains. There's just tons of different tickets from down through time, whether it's a passenger train ticket. Here's just an envelope that was used to put tickets in when you bought your tickets from the counter. And then once a conductor collected tickets, he would staple everybody's fares together or tickets together for the train, and there's just booklets of a couple of these. Some of the more modern printed out tickets, here's another conductor's bunch of tickets off a train here. And these were for specific areas, so it tells you the area on the tickets, it tells you who the person was that bought it, where they're coming from, where they're going to. Each one of these is also just a story all on its own. And the baggage tickets are they're neat. Here's a very, very old one from the Capitol Limited, just a nice piece of history. There's also a passenger train conductor's booklet here who would keep track of fares and rates and all that type of thing on the passenger trains as well. So just a lot of different things you can collect. Now, the next few slides are just of various system maps and stuff that were from the B&O Railroad. This map here, every time they would do a check on a railroad, they would put together one of these little maps, and their computer, as they rode through the railroad, would measure every single grade, every single curve, and everything. And all that information is on these real long maps. And some of these, like this coal field, if you're joining a little spur mine leg of the railroad in a certain area, this just gives you invaluable information. And as far as other paper goods, there's just tons of handouts that all railroads put out there. Whether it's advertising certain trains that were premier trains on the railroad, or different fare prices or increases, or here's one for, sleeper cars and, the comfortable private rooms. There's pamphlets here that just go into the scenery that you'll see on the railroads to entice people to ride a railroad just for the scenic views. A lot of places go to a lot of famous places, whether it's Chicago, Washington, D.C., Cincinnati, Pittsburgh. And these are just places, from these pamphlets on the B&O Railroad. But, there's just a lot of good information, and some of the things on the railroads themselves, certain bridges and things that were on the railroads were just really phenomenal architectural pieces of work. So anyway, there's just tons of good pamphlets out there that just give a lot of good information on the railroad itself. And some are just basic booklets, like this passenger travel from 1925 to 1880s and stuff like that. Or when a brand new train came out, here's one on the Columbian, which was really a premier passenger car route on the B&O. And then there's tons of just booklets that were given to employees and stuff for training purposes. Different types of paperwork that, here's one for passenger conductors. A lot of different types of paperwork for conductors and people that worked on the trains to keep track of the trains, whether it was the condition of the car, the number of people that were using the service, some of the items that were stored on the car to be kept track of and made sure they were all in working order. Empty car bills, just tons of paperwork went into running a railroad. And lots of these can be taken and used for a scale model railroad as well if you want to. A lot of people just enjoy running trains. Some people really get into how everything was done and want to be operated like a real railroad. And a lot of this paperwork could help you do that. But railroads had warehouses and warehouses and warehouses full of just paperwork. Everything had to be documented, especially from the period of time that the federal government took over the railroads during the war on. And just everything had to be so documented and triple documented and on and on and on. And here's a couple little placards that would be great for, scaling down and putting on some model cars. Just a lot of nice stuff. Or if you wanted to shop a car on your railroad, here's a car or a paper card that you could use to do that and send your cars to the shop. And, just another part of your car card system. Tons of placards that could be used on cars and various things. There's also booklets on, crossings and removals and stuff that happened on the railroad. So if you're modeling a specific period of time, you'll know what was there and what was not there. I mean, here's an inspector's trip, with the schedule and stuff. I do have a few other oddities thrown in here too. There's just an old magazine of railroad stories, which the stories in these are just really, really invaluable. They're really incredible. A lot of railroads had tons of postcards out there that pictured, famous trains or famous buildings along the railroad, and those are very collectible. A lot of checks were written to and from the B&O Railroad, and here's just one that was written to the B&O Railroad. There's also official lists out there. Most railroads had one form or another of these, and these just give you all the sidings, the industries, everything that was on the railroad during that period of time and a date on these things. It tells you every industry that was operational and every siding that was there. So if you're wanting to set up modeling, the transfer of freight cars from one point to another point, this gives you all those points to go by to set up moving around some model trains and doing switching and stuff for your model railroad. More postcards, matchbook covers. A lot of the trains gave out matches on the trains for people to light cigarettes or cigars, whatever, and they had their own matches. But just more and more and more paperwork. It's just amazing how much stuff was out there. Safety rule booklets and stuff like these. A lot of people that ran the engineers or the firemen or the brakemen or the conductors, they all had rules that were very, very strict rules, and they all had these booklets to learn from. And they had to know these. They had to sign off of the fact that they had read these and they understood them all, and these were the rules that they were going to live by. And if they didn't, there were courts set up by the railroad, and you had to go to court to defend yourself if you didn't follow these rules. They were very strict about these, mostly for safety's sake, for a lot of different reasons. But there's just tons of these booklets out there that cover any kind of subjects you can think of. Just everything and anything that had to do with the railroad is in some of these booklets. And just more and more and more paperwork. I didn't really realize I had this much stuff in these notebooks. I mean, here's a sheet of sheet music for Hail the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. The original Railroad magazine was called the Royal Blue early on, which was their premier passenger train, but I do have a couple copies of the original magazine that they had. And just more and more and more paperwork. It's just incredible the different stuff you can find. You know, just basic stationery sheet here that could have been used for anything. Mostly it was used for people in the railroad themselves. And just some of these that, you know, would have been posted around the railroad for world trade fairs and stuff like that. Just, you know, anything can be used anywhere on a railroad. It's just amazing the amount of paperwork that they really did have. You know, here's one for all you slipping your wheels. It's just easy to destroy a rail by the engineers burning their wheels. You know, I do have a couple of menus here from the dining cars. One here is just a menu from the Royal Limited on what you could order. And there's also a booklet here that was put out by the railroad that was great recipes from that era so that you could cook things in your home that was put out by the railroad. Another little sideline that I really enjoy are the pamphlets and paperwork on this West Virginia Transportation Company. During the period of time that the passenger service was starting to fail, the federal government wouldn't let them get rid of the trains even though they were losing money. So the B&O set up this West Virginia transportation system, which kind of went into a couple other states as well. But basically this was just a bus system, and they would start using buses to transport people from city to city, and then they could discontinue their passenger car routes and at least maintain a better balance on the money. Collections, you know, I'm just a collector by nature. You know, I have narrowed down a lot of the things I collect over the years. Some of this Railroadiana, you know, I probably ought to just sell it and get rid of it. There's a few things I would like to frame and keep for, you know, the walls in the hobby room eventually when I have a room to do this in and model in. And there's a lot of things that, you know, would be good examples to use for paperwork for a model railroad. And some of those placards would be great to reduce in size and actually use on freight cars. So some of this stuff is and can pertain to model railroading if you want it to. It just depends on how involved you want to get with paperwork and that type of thing on your model railroad. For those people that use card system for you know, sending their cards around their model railroad and keeping track of everything and making up trains, some of this stuff can pertain to that. So, you know, it can be useful to model railroading, or, you know, it just looks good, some of it on your walls in your hobby room. It's just something to connect your model railroad with the real railroad that you're trying to model. In any case, thank you for coming back and sharing this time with me. I hope you enjoyed this little sidetrack from my normal type of videos. Hopefully maybe you can get some ideas on how to do some things that'll work for your model railroad using Railroadiana and paper goods. You know, like and share this video with other people out there in the hobby. Especially B&O fans might want to like to see some of this stuff. In any case, you know, it's just all about having fun. Happy model railroading.